With severe tropical storm Rolly now in the country, how are disaster agencies preparing collectively? We find out from National Disaster Management Spokesperson Mark Timbal. Mark, good to hear from you. I appreciate your time. Let me start by asking, while we are still several hours away from Rolly making landfall, potentially in the Quezon, Aurora area, as PAGASA is saying, what should the local government units in these areas, as well as residents there, should be doing by this time?
Sir David, good evening, and to our viewers as well. What we have seen during our pre-disaster risk assessment meeting yesterday was that there is a strong likelihood or increased chance of flooding and landslide that would be brought by Rolly once Rolly comes in contact with, once Rolly makes landfall. And we have provided warnings to the local government in those areas in the eastern seaboard that because of this increased likelihood of flooding and landslide, as well as storm surge and lahar flow, preemptive evacuations must be done prior to the actual arrival of the storm, especially in those areas with high susceptibility for those hazards. Local government, yes. Yes, sir.
Sorry, you're saying?
Yeah, local governments have also been advised to prepare their evacuation centers as well as the stockpiles for relief items before the storm comes in.
Right, especially with us still dealing with this health crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, Mark, many of the areas Typhoon Quinta badly devastated are still picking up the pieces and their communities still saturated. How do we factor in these realities as these areas brace for another potentially destructive and even deadly typhoon?
Yes, the danger is very imminent because the water, the ground has been well saturated with a lot of days' worth of rainfall. And we have informed local governments that given the situation that a lot of floodings have happened in the foothills of the mountainous areas, the hilly areas, as well as the floodplains, if there is the likelihood of another flooding to occur, then people should be moved immediately, and the goods, the stockpile of relief items should be prepositioned way beforehand.
Of course, our local government units are dealing with layers of challenges, as we've mentioned, in preparing for a potential disasters, especially amid this pandemic. But aside from giving these warnings and perhaps more coordinations, how is NDRRMC helping these LGUs deal with all these challenges?
If you remember, Sir David, that the operations for COVID-19 started mid-March, and local governments have already been using their quick response fund, the 30% of their local disaster fund, to sustain their operations. But since this is an extended operation, the NDRRMC, to assist the LGUs, have already authorized the access of the remaining 70% of the local DRRM fund to be used for support spending for relief and response activities. This additional funding or access to funding will help local government units to sustain their continued operations. And the NDRRMC is in close coordination with the Regional Disaster Council and other government agencies that provide relief and response support. The Armed Forces of the Philippines, the Philippine Coast Guard, the Philippine National Police, the DSWD, and the Department of Interior Local Government and other agencies are all on board to provide support to our LGUs.
Now, during extreme weather like typhoons, like you mentioned, Mark, you keep an eye on incidents of massive flooding, landslides, and of course, storm surge. But for the longest time, your agency has been advocating that local government units should maximize the use of their hazard maps. How much of disaster preparedness tools like this are actually being used by the LGUs?
Well, all of these maps had been rolled out to the local government units. And as far as we can see, given that in the activities of the LGUs in the recent storms, they have been doing the preemptive evacuations in all those susceptible areas. So we construe this as a continued use and effective use of the hazard maps that had been distributed to them.
Right. Local government units may impose, as you also pointed out earlier, mandatory evacuation or preemptive evacuation. But do you agree that this order doesn't mean people are just being forced to leave their homes? It means that residents who choose to stay despite the order, rescue services might not or will not be available immediately for them if they will need help now, because as we've seen in previous disasters, it is virtually impossible and impractical doing rescue missions in the middle of a storm.
That's correct, because it will endanger the lives of our responders as well. But what we can see, Sir David, is that there has been a change in the attitude of our countrymen when it comes to these evacuation orders. With the experience that we've had in the previous storms, people have been cooperating with the local government units, and they have been evacuating on time, way beforehand, and the local government units were able to bring them to the evacuation centers and support them during their stay. If I may as well put this
Please go ahead.
Message is that if you notice, Sir David, that a number of our casualties, the fatalities, were victims of drowning and fallen debris. We construe this as these people were. These victims were outside during the time of the storm. We would like to advise our countrymen, especially those who are in those susceptible areas, to please take cover, take shelter during the storm. Don't go out, don't cross waterways, especially if you see that the current is very strong. And if there's a warning for you not to go out, especially the fishermen, please follow these injunctions coming from our authorities. The point of these instructions or orders is to keep you safe, not to just prevent you from going out. This will prevent future casualties in these incoming storms.
Right. If they cannot hunker down, at least coordinate, work with their local leaders to be able to move them to safer grounds. National Disaster Management Spokesperson Mark Timbal, always a pleasure talking to you.